The Galactic Trade Station Epsilon. 7 buzzed with activity as hundreds of alien species moved through its massive corridors. Among them walked a lone human figure who drew stares and whispers from every direction. His name was Nicholas Krauss, but most humans knew him by another name entirely. Nicholas stood out not just because he was human, but because of what he wore. His bright red suit trimmed with white fur looked ridiculous among the sleek metallic uniforms and biosuits of the other species. His white beard, grown long and full, made him look ancient by galactic standards. The large sack he carried over his shoulder completed the strange picture. "Look at that primitive," hissed a Zalathian merchant, his purple scales rippling with amusement. "What kind of fool dresses like that in a civilized station?" A group of Kentari diplomats floated past, their translucent bodies pulsing with colors that indicated mockery. The humans sent their worst representative, one transmitted telepathically to his companions. No wonder they're still confined to one solar system. Nicholas heard it all. His universal translator picked up every insult, every joke, every dismissive comment. But he kept walking, his heavy boots making soft sounds on the station floor. He had a destination in mind, the Grand Assembly Hall where the Galactic Council was meeting. The security guards at the entrance were Threxians, massive 8-foot-tall beings with 4 arms and skin like granite. They looked down at Nicholas with what might have been confusion on their rocky faces. "State your business, human," the lead guard rumbled. "I'm here for the cultural exhibition," Nicholas replied calmly. "Earth's contribution to the Galactic Community Showcase." The guards exchanged glances. They had heard about this event. Each member species was invited to present something unique from their culture. Most brought advanced technology, revolutionary art, or scientific breakthroughs. The humans had sent this. "You're the Earth representative?" The guard couldn't hide his disbelief. "Dressed like that. This outfit represents an important Earth tradition," Nicholas explained patiently. "May I enter?" The guard scanned him and his sack. Finding no weapons or banned technology, they reluctantly stepped aside. As Nicholas entered the vast assembly hall, a wave of laughter followed him. The hall was magnificent, with a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the galaxy. Thousands of seats arranged in circular tiers faced a central platform. Representatives from over 300 civilizations filled the space, their varied forms creating a tapestry of life from across the stars. Nicholas found his assigned spot, a small section marked with Earth's designation. As he settled in, the beings around him shifted away, as if his strange appearance might be contagious. "Is that really what humans think is impressive?" A Vorthan ambassador said loudly enough for all nearby to hear. The creature's tentacles writhed with amusement. "That primitive costume?" An announcement echoed through the hall. The cultural exhibition would begin soon. Each species would have time to present their contribution. Nicholas watched as others prepared their displays, holographic projectors, consciousness-sharing devices, artistic compositions that existed in 12 dimensions. He simply sat quietly, his sack beside him, waiting. The exhibition began with the Altarians, who presented a musical performance that could be experienced through all senses simultaneously. The audience responded with appropriate appreciation. Next came the Rigelians with their probability sculptures, art that existed in multiple states until observed. Species after species presented wonders that showcased their advancement, their sophistication, their superiority. The audience applauded politely for each, though Nicholas noticed a certain weariness creeping into their responses. They had seen variations of these marvels before. Now, the announcer's voice boomed, "We have a unique entry. From Earth, a Class F civilization, we have Nicholas Krauss presenting something called Santa Claus." The laughter started immediately. It grew as Nicholas stood and made his way to the central platform, carrying his sack. By the time he reached the center, the entire assembly was in uproar. "Santa Claus?" Someone shouted. "Is that supposed to be technology? Look at that primitive outfit." Another voice called out, "Red fabric and animal fur." Nicholas stood in the center of the platform, surrounded by thousands of alien beings, all mocking him. The laughter was deafening. Some species expressed amusement through color changes, others through harmonics, but the message was universal. This human was a joke. He waited. The sack at his feet remained closed. The council moderator, a distinguished Etherian whose form shifted between solid and gas, called for order. "Please, let the humans speak," she said, though even her voice carried a hint of condescension. "Every species deserves their moment." Nicholas smiled. It was a warm smile, the kind that had comforted countless children over centuries. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. "Thank you," he said simply. "I know I must look strange to all of you. This red suit, this white beard, this sack of mysteries, they must seem primitive compared to your dimensional art and consciousness symphonies." More chuckles rippled through the crowd, but Nicholas continued. "You're right that I don't bring advanced technology. I don't have sculptures that exist in multiple realities or music that transcends sensation. What I bring is something much older and, perhaps, much more powerful. What could be more powerful than quantum manipulation?" A scientist from Betelgeuse called out, causing another wave of laughter. Nicholas reached into his sack. The motion was simple, unremarkable, but something about it made a few beings in the front rows fall silent. "On Earth," Nicholas continued, "we have a tradition. Once a year, during our coldest season, when nights are long and the world seems harsh, we remember something important. We remember that giving without expectation of return is the greatest power in the universe." He pulled out a small wrap box. It was covered in simple paper decorated with primitive designs, trees, stars, snowflakes. By galactic standards, it was embarrassingly basic. This tradition is embodied in a figure called Santa Claus, a being who travels the world in a single night, bringing gifts to children. Not because he has to, not because he gains anything from it, but simply because the act of giving creates joy. The laughter had died down now. Something in Nicholas's voice, in his manner, had shifted the atmosphere slightly. "You see this as primitive," Nicholas said, looking around the vast hall. "And maybe it is. We don't travel faster than light to deliver these gifts. We don't use teleportation or time dilation. The story we tell our children is impossible by any scientific standard." He held up the small wrap box. "But the impossible story teaches a possible truth. That joy shared is joy multiplied. That the act of giving transforms both giver and receiver. That in a universe vast and cold, we can create warmth through simple kindness." A Zalathian in the front row snorted. "Pretty words, human. But what does that box do? Does it contain some technology you're hiding?" Nicholas walked to the edge of the platform, closer to the crowd. "Would you like to find out?" He held the box toward the Zalathian. "It's yours if you want it." The alien pulled back, suspicious. "What's the catch? What do you want in return?" "Nothing," Nicholas said simply. "That's the point." The Zalathian scales shifted through several colors. Confusion, suspicion, curiosity. Finally, a scaled hand reached out and took the box. "Open it," Nicholas encouraged. The alien's claws made quick work of the primitive paper. Inside was a small device, clearly of human construction, but elegant in its simplicity. The Zalathian held it up, examining it. It's a holographic projector," the alien said slowly. "But a simple one. It only shows one thing." "Turn it on," Nicholas suggested. The Zalathian activated the device. Above it appeared a hologram, not of advanced technology or artistic achievement, but of a small Zalathian youngling playing in what looked like a garden. The image was incredibly detailed, full of warmth and life. The alien scales went pale. How did you?" "Your species' application to join the Galactic Council included cultural information," Nicholas explained to the now silent hall, "including the tradition of memorial gardens for lost family members. The image is constructed from public records and biological data. Your daughter, I believe." The Zalathian's voice was barely a whisper. "She died in the colonial transport accident 40 cycles ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Nicholas said gently. "The projector will run for exactly 1,000 of your planetary rotations. Long enough to remind you of joy, not so long that it prevents healing. The hall had gone completely silent. Every being watched as the tough, mockery-filled Zalathian merchant cradled the simple device like the most precious treasure in the galaxy. Nicholas turned back to address the assembly. Every gift in this sack was chosen specifically. Each one is simple by your standards, but each one is perfect for its recipient. Because the true gift isn't the object, it's the knowledge that someone, somewhere, cared enough to think of you. That's impossible. An AI collective hummed from the upper tiers. To research and create individual gifts for everyone here, the time alone. Nicholas smiled again. On Earth, children are told that Santa Claus visits every home in one night. Impossible, as I said. But millions of humans make it possible by taking on a role themselves. Parents, friends, strangers, all becoming Santa Claus for someone else. He reached into his sack again, pulling out gift after gift, each wrapped in the same simple paper. I've been preparing for this moment for 5 Earth years, learning about each of your species, your cultures, your individual stories. Not because Earth ordered me to, not because I expected anything in return, but because this is what Santa Claus does. A young Vorthan in the mid-tier seats suddenly stood up. My name is Telex. I published a poem in my local cultural archive 3 years ago. No one read it. It was about feeling disconnected from my ancestry after leaving our homeworld. Nicholas pulled out a specific gift from his sack without hesitation. Third row, seat 47. This is for you, Telex. The young Vorthan's tentacles trembled as they caught the thrown gift. Inside the wrapping was a bound book, physical, made of synthetic materials that would last centuries. The poem was printed inside in Vorthan script, but it was accompanied by illustrations, images of the Vorthan homeworld created by Earth artists who had studied their culture. At the bottom of each page were notes from humans who had read translated versions of the poem and found meaning in it. You humans read my poem? Telex's voice broke with emotion. And they understood. Art crosses all boundaries, Nicholas said. Your words touched many hearts on Earth. The transformation in the hall was palpable now. Where there had been mockery, there was wonder. Where there had been superiority, there was curiosity. These advanced beings, with all their technology and sophistication, were watching something they hadn't expected, genuine, thoughtful compassion from a species they had dismissed. Nicholas continued pulling gifts from his sack. For the Etherian moderator, a musical composition created by human children who had been told about her species' language of harmonics. They had tried to say thank you for keeping peace in her own frequency patterns. For the Threxian guards, carved stone sculptures made by human artists who had studied Threxian aesthetic preferences, not perfect by Threxian standards, but clearly made with respect and effort. Each gift was simple. None contained advanced technology or revolutionary concepts. But each one carried something more powerful, proof that someone from a primitive world had taken the time to understand, to care, to create something meaningful for a being they had never met. The AI collective received a gift that made their entire network pause, a logic puzzle created by human philosophers specifically for artificial intelligences, exploring concepts of gift-giving and altruism in purely logical terms. It was elementary by their standards, but the effort behind it, the attempt to speak in their language of pure reason while explaining pure emotion, created cascading analyses throughout their system. This is highly irregular, the collective announced. We are experiencing gratitude. This is inefficient. There is no logical reason for this emotional subroutine activation. And yet it's there, Nicholas observed. Even logic cannot deny the power of being remembered. Hours passed. Nicholas moved through the crowd, somehow finding each being, knowing exactly which gift was meant for whom. His sack never seemed to empty, though by any logical calculation, it should have been depleted long ago. A Rigelian philosopher-scientist approached the platform where Nicholas had returned. I study probability mechanics, she said. The chance of you selecting the correct gift for each individual, of having researched thousands of separate beings, of creating meaningful connections across species barriers, it's statistically impossible. So, is faster than light travel, according to human science, Nicholas replied. Yet here we all are. Sometimes the impossible happens because we refuse to accept that it can't. The Rigellian considered this. You're suggesting that belief shapes reality? I'm suggesting that kindness shapes reality, Nicholas corrected. When we act as if the universe is a place where strangers can bring joy to each other, it becomes that place. But what do you gain from this? The question came from a Kindari elder, his translucent form pulsing with confused colors. Your planet gains no trade advantages. You receive no technology in exchange. This effort costs you years with no return. Nicholas sat down on the edge of the platform, suddenly looking every one of his many years. Let me tell you what I gain, he said. I gain the Zalathian merchant who will go home tonight and remember his daughter with joy instead of only pain. I gain the young Vorthan poet who now knows their words matter. I gain the AI collective discovering they can feel gratitude. He gestured to the entire assembly. I gain a galaxy where beings who mock a human in a red suit can learn that sometimes the most advanced technology is an open heart, where species that measure everything in profit can discover that some things become more valuable when given away. The hall was silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional sound of gifts being unwrapped. The mighty assembly of advanced civilizations, each species proud of their achievements and confident in their superiority, sat quietly as they held simple gifts from a world they had dismissed. Finally, the council moderator spoke. Nicholas Krauss of Earth, she said formally, you have presented something we did not expect. Not technology, not art in the traditional sense, but what would you call this? Nicholas stood, shouldering his now lighter sack. On Earth, we call it Christmas spirit. The belief that we are all connected, that joy shared multiplies throughout the universe, that the greatest power isn't in taking but in giving. And this Santa Claus, the moderator continued, this is you. Nicholas shook his head. Santa Claus is anyone who chooses to bring joy without expecting return. Today, I had that honor. Tomorrow, it could be any of you. He looked around the hall. The gift I truly bring isn't in this sack. It's the idea that each of you could be Santa Claus for someone else. A young Altarian stood up suddenly. I want to try. My neighbor's child has been sick. I could create a sensory composition to help them feel better. Not for trade or obligation, just because my department has a new employee from off-world. A Threxian guard rumbled thoughtfully. They seem lonely. Perhaps I could carve them a welcome stone. Throughout the hall, similar murmurs arose. Beings who had entered focused on displaying their superiority were now thinking about others, about connections, about joy given freely. Nicholas began walking toward the exit. As he passed through the assembly, something unprecedented happened. One by one, beings stood. Not in mockery now, but in respect. The standing ovation spread through the hall like a wave, encompassing every species, every representative. Even the AI collective flickered their lights in what they designated as Approval Pattern Alpha. At the door, Nicholas turned back one last time. The hall full of advanced civilizations, each clutching simple gifts from Earth, looked back at him. Where there had been condescension was now understanding. Where there had been mockery was now wonder. Merry Christmas, Nicholas called out, the human phrase translating into hundreds of languages simultaneously. And remember, the gift isn't in the giving or the receiving. It's in the connection between hearts across the cosmos. As he left, the Galactic Council continued their session, but something had fundamentally changed. The discussions of trade routes and territorial disputes seemed somehow smaller now. Several representatives were already making plans, thinking of gifts they could give, connections they could make. The Zalathian merchant carefully packed away his holographic projector and approached the Vorthan poet. Your words about disconnection from ancestry, he said quietly. I understand this feeling. Would you like to talk? Throughout the station, words spread quickly. The human in the red suit had done something impossible. Not through technology or power, but through something far more difficult to achieve. He had made the galaxy a little smaller, a little warmer, a little more connected. And in the years that followed, a new tradition began to spread through the Galactic Council. Once a cycle, beings would exchange gifts, not for trade, not for advantage, but simply to create joy. They called it various names in different languages, but humans who visited the station would recognize it immediately. The spirit of Santa Claus had gone interstellar. 5 years had passed since Nicholas Krauss stunned the Galactic Assembly. The story of the human Santa had become legend, spreading through trade routes and communication networks to the farthest reaches of civilized space. What started as mockery had transformed into something else entirely, a movement that worried the established powers of the galaxy. On the planet Zirion Prime, home to the Galactic Council's permanent headquarters, an emergency session had been called. The massive chamber, carved from a single crystal that resonated with harmonic frequencies, hummed with tension. Representatives from the most powerful civilizations in known space had gathered, but this time their concern wasn't about trade disputes or territorial expansion. The situation has become untenable, declared Administrator Vex of the Hegemony Collective. The silicon-based life form's crystalline structure flickered with agitation. This gift-giving phenomenon has spread to over 60% of member worlds. Productivity in key sectors has dropped by measurable percentages. High Chancellor Thorne of the Rigelian Confederacy manipulated probability fields to display concerning data. Our analysis shows that beings are spending increasing time on non-profitable activities, creating items for others without compensation, visiting neighbors without agenda. Some have even begun wearing variations of the red suit. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The economic implications were staggering. The entire galactic economy was built on careful exchanges, measured transactions, and calculated relationships. This new behavior pattern threatened the very foundation of interstellar commerce. It gets worse, interjected Commerce Director Zala, a Kentari whose translucent form pulsed with urgent colors. The human world has been inundated with requests. Millions of beings want to meet this Santa Claus, to learn about their Christmas. Earth's primitive infrastructure can't handle the attention. On the main display, images flickered showing the chaos. Ships crowded Earth's orbital space. Alien visitors wandered human cities searching for Nicholas Krauss. The small blue planet, previously ignored by most of the galaxy, had become an unexpected pilgrimage site. We need to act, Vex insisted. This social contagion must be contained before it causes irreversible damage to established order. But not everyone in the chamber agreed. Ambassador Telia of the Vorthan Republic stood, her tentacles moving in patterns of disagreement. Damage? My world has seen crime rates drop to historic lows. Citizens report higher satisfaction levels. How is this damage? Because it's unsustainable, Thorne responded. Economies don't function on feelings and good intentions. They require structure, exchange, measurable value. The debate raged for hours. Some representatives spoke of the positive changes they'd witnessed, communities growing closer, ancient feuds being resolved through simple acts of kindness, innovation sparked by gifts that inspired new thinking. Others warned of economic collapse, social chaos, the abandonment of centuries-old systems that had maintained order. Finally, a decision was reached. A delegation would travel to Earth to meet with Nicholas Krauss. Their mission: understand the full implications of what he had started and, if necessary, convince him to help contain it. The journey to Earth took 3 standard cycles. The delegation traveled aboard the Sovereign's Light, the Galactic Council's most advanced diplomatic vessel. The team included some of the galaxy's brightest minds: sociologists, economists, philosophers, and military strategists. They prepared for every scenario except the one they encountered. Earth's orbital space was indeed chaotic, but not in the way they expected. Instead of conflict over limited docking positions, ships were cooperating, making room for newcomers, sharing resources. Captains who would normally charge premium rates for priority access were simply helping organize efficient traffic patterns. Abnormal behavior confirmed, noted Dr. Kylix, the mission's lead behavioral analyst. Economic opportunities being ignored in favor of cooperative action. As their shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, They expected to find a world transformed by alien contact, perhaps attempting to exploit their sudden popularity. Instead, they found something else. The landing site in Kansas was surrounded not by military forces or government officials, but by volunteers. Humans and visiting aliens worked together, providing directions, translation services, basic accommodation for the flood of visitors. Everything was free. Impossible mutuelle de vex. No species provides services without compensation. There must be hidden charges. But investigation revealed none. The humans seemed genuinely happy to help, asking nothing in return except perhaps stories from other worlds. Even more disturbing to the delegation, many visiting aliens had adopted the same behavior. They found Nicholas Krauss not in some grand headquarters or government facility, but in a modest workshop on the outskirts of a small town. The building was expanded now, with additions clearly built using various alien construction techniques. Gift from grateful visitors. Nicholas was older, his beard whiter, his movements slower. But his eyes still held the same warmth that had silenced the galactic assembly. He was working alongside beings from a dozen different worlds, all engaged in creating gifts. "Welcome," Nicholas said as the delegation entered. He showed no surprise at their arrival, as if he'd been expecting them. "Would you like some cocoa? The Altarians helped me modify the recipe so most species can enjoy it." The delegation exchanged glances. They had prepared for confrontation, negotiation, perhaps even conflict. They hadn't prepared for hospitality. "We're here on official business," Vex stated firmly. "The Galactic Council has concerns about the societal disruption your ideology has caused." Nicholas nodded, setting aside the toy he'd been carving. "I imagine they do. Please sit. Tell me about these concerns." For the next hour, the delegation laid out their case. Economic disruptions, social changes, the abandonment of established protocols, the risk to centuries of carefully balanced interstellar relationships. Nicholas listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. When they finished, he stood and walked to a wall covered in what looked like children's drawings, except these were from children of hundreds of different species. "Do you know what these are?" he asked. "Primitive art," Thorne suggested dismissively. "Letters to Santa," Nicholas corrected. "From children who've never seen Earth, who've never met a human, but who understand something important." That joy shared is joy multiplied. He turned back to the delegation. "You speak of economic disruption, but what is an economy? At its heart, it's beings exchanging what they have for what they need. We've simply reminded people that what they need isn't always material." "That's a pleasant philosophy," Vex argued, "but civilizations run on resources, not feelings." Nicholas smiled. "Let me show you something." He led them through the workshop to a larger room. Inside, beings from across the galaxy worked on projects. A Threxian carefully painted delicate designs on fragile ornaments. A group of Kintari were weaving light itself into decorative patterns. Even a few members of the AI collective had mobile units present, calculating optimal gift-wrapping techniques. "The Threxian is Guard Captain Crocs," Nicholas explained. "He controls security for one of the largest trade stations in the Vega system. He takes leave once a year to come here. Says it reminds him why he protects people." He pointed to the Kintari group. "Those are some of your species' most brilliant scientists, Director Zala. They developed 3 new applications for photon manipulation while trying to create the perfect tree decoration. They've shared the patents freely." "This proves our point," Vex insisted. "Valuable resources being wasted on frivolity." But Nicholas shook his head. Captain Crocs stopped a major piracy ring last year. When asked how he identified the criminals among thousands of travelers, he said he could recognize those who had never learned to give. The Kintari team's innovations have improved medical scanning technology across 12 sectors. He led them to another section where a young human woman was teaching an insectoid Zephyrin how to bake cookies. Sarah volunteers here. She's studying xenobiology. She's learned more about alien physiology from figuring out recipe modifications than from any textbook. She's already solved 2 interspecies dietary incompatibilities that stumped your scientists for decades. The delegation observed in silence, as beings who should have been competitors, who came from civilizations with long histories of conflict, worked side by side. They laughed at shared failures, celebrated small successes, and helped each other without keeping score. "This is what concerns your council," Nicholas said quietly. "Not economic disruption, but the fear that beings might discover they have more in common than they thought. That artificial barriers maintaining power structures might crumble when people realize that a Zalathian child's laugh sounds remarkably like a human's." "You're being naive," Thorne protested. "Competition drives innovation. Conflict strengthens species. What you're promoting is stagnation through contentment." Nicholas picked up a complex device from a workbench. "This is a universal translator upgrade, created by a team of linguists from 18 species who met here last Christmas. They wanted to make sure Merry Christmas could be perfectly translated into every known language, capturing not just words, but intent and feeling." He set it down carefully. "It's advanced your translation technology by 50 years. They're not selling it. They're giving it away, because they discovered that when beings truly understand each other, conflict becomes harder to justify." Dr. Kylix had been unusually quiet, running constant analyses. Now she spoke. "The behavioral patterns I'm observing shouldn't be possible. Different species evolved under different conditions with different neurochemistry, yet they're all exhibiting similar responses. Joy, generosity, connection. Almost like these qualities are universal," Nicholas suggested. "Buried under layers of civilization and protocol, but still there. We just gave them permission to surface." The delegation spent 3 days on Earth. They observed gift-making workshops where former enemies collaborated. They attended communal meals where species with incompatible diets found ways to share the experience, if not the food. They watched children, human and alien alike, perform plays about Santa Claus visiting different worlds, each culture adding their own traditions to the story. Most disturbing to their mission, they found themselves affected. Vex, who had arrived determined to end this disruption, found himself helping a group of younglings paint ornaments. His crystalline structure, usually carefully controlled, began displaying colors of genuine pleasure. Thorne, the probability mathematician, became fascinated by the statistical impossibility of the workshop's success. "By all calculations, this should have collapsed into chaos within days," she admitted to Nicholas. "Different species, different goals, different methods, yet works. Because everyone here chose to be here," Nicholas explained. "Not for profit or obligation, but because they wanted to be part of something larger than themselves." On their final evening, the delegation attended what the humans called a Christmas party. The workshop's main floor had been cleared and decorated with contributions from every world represented. Music that somehow blended harmonics from dozens of cultures filled the air. Foods modified for every possible biology were shared. And at the center of it all, Nicholas Krauss sat in a chair that had become known as the Santa throne, itself a gift, crafted by Rigellian artisans who had abandoned probability-based art for the certainty of creating joy. One by one, beings approached him, not with requests, but with offerings. A young Altarian performed a sensory composition about the first time they felt the Christmas spirit. A Vorthan poet recited verses about connection across the cosmos. Even members of the AI collective presented logical proofs that altruism could be computationally optimal. The delegation watched from the side, their mission to contain this phenomenon feeling increasingly hollow. How could they return to the Galactic Council and recommend suppressing joy? How could they argue against something that brought out the best in so many species? "It's not sustainable," Vex said quietly, but even his voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps," Nicholas agreed, joining them as the party continued around him. "But then, again, they said the same about flight, about space travel, about peace itself. Sometimes the impossible becomes inevitable simply because enough beings believe in it." Director Zala had been processing data throughout their visit. Now she displayed her findings for the delegation to see. Crime rates down across participating worlds. Innovation up in unexpected sectors. Mental health improvements. Even some long-standing conflicts showing signs of resolution. Correlation isn't causation, Thorne pointed out, but her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself. Nicholas reached into his ever-present sack and pulled out wrapped packages. "I have something for each of you," he said. "Not to change your minds or influence your report, just because it's Christmas." The delegation hesitated. Accepting gifts would compromise their objectivity. It went against protocol. But as they watched the joy around them, as they felt something shift in their own perspectives, each reached out. Vex's gift was a small holographic display showing his home world, but viewed from the perspective of a child seeing it for the first time. The wonder in that simulated young gaze made his crystalline form resonate with frequencies he hadn't experienced in centuries. Thorne received a puzzle that should have been simple for her probability-calculating mind, but it required her to think not in terms of optimal solutions, but in terms of what would bring the most joy to others solving it with her. It challenged every assumption she held about efficiency. Dr. Kylix found herself holding a book, an actual physical book, filled with observations about her own species' capacity for joy, written by humans who had studied Zephyrin visitors. The insights were elementary by her standards, but the effort to understand, the desire to connect, touched something in her compound mind. Director Zala's gift was a light sculpture created by human artists working with Kantari teachers. It showed the moment when two different species first understand each other, captured in wavelengths visible only to her kind. It was technically imperfect, but emotionally powerful. "Ow," Vex asked, his voice barely stable. "How do you know exactly what would affect each of us?" Nicholas's eyes twinkled. "Because I pay attention. Because every being, no matter how advanced or different, has something that brings them joy. The gift of Santa Claus isn't in the giving. It's in caring enough to notice what would make another soul light up." The party continued around them, but the delegation stood in a small circle of contemplation. Everything they had come to accomplish, every argument they had prepared, seemed small compared to what they were witnessing. "The council won't understand," Thorne said finally. "They'll see only the disruption, not the whatever this is." "Then, help them see," Nicholas suggested. "You have the data, you have the observations, but more importantly, you have the experience. You felt it yourselves now. You want us to lie to the Galactic Council?" Vex asked, though he was clutching his holographic display carefully. "I want you to tell the truth," Nicholas corrected. "The whole truth. Not just the economic projections and social disruptions, but also the laughter, the connections, the innovations born from joy rather than competition. The peace that comes when beings stop seeing each other as rivals and start seeing each other as neighbors." The next morning, the delegation prepared to leave. The workshop was quieter, many volunteers resting after the celebration. Nicholas saw them off personally, looking tired but content. "What will you tell the council?" he asked. The delegation exchanged glances. In 3 days, everything they believed about social order and progress had been challenged. They had come as investigators and would leave as witnesses to something unprecedented in galactic history. "We'll tell them the truth," Dr. Kylix said finally, "that humanity has introduced a social virus to the galaxy." Nicholas's face fell slightly until she continued. "A virus of joy, of connection, of remembering that all our advancement means nothing if we forget to care for each other. We'll tell them it's spreading and can't be stopped. And we'll tell them that maybe, just maybe, that's the best thing that ever happened to us." As their shuttle lifted off, the delegation saw the workshop from above. Beings were already returning to work, creating gifts for strangers across the galaxy. The movement that had started with one human in a red suit had become something unstoppable, not through force or manipulation, but through the simple recognition that joy shared multiplies infinitely. The journey back to Zirian Prime took another 3 cycles. During that time, something interesting happened. The delegation found themselves planning, not how to contain the Christmas phenomenon, but how to help it grow. Vex designed distribution networks that could handle gift exchanges between worlds. Thorne calculated optimal celebration dates that would work across different planetary calendars. Kylix studied the psychological benefits more deeply, finding applications for conflict resolution. Zala worked on technologies that could help beings create more meaningful gifts. By the time they reached the Galactic Council, they were no longer investigators sent to solve a problem. They had become ambassadors for a solution they didn't fully understand but couldn't deny. The council chamber was packed for their report. Every member species had sent representatives, all eager to hear how the human contagion could be stopped. They expected recommendations for quarantine, economic sanctions, perhaps even military intervention. Instead, the delegation presented something else entirely. Honored representatives, Vex began, his crystalline form displaying colors the Assembly had never seen from him before. We traveled to Earth to investigate a disruption. We discovered a revolution, not of weapons or technology, but of perspective. The presentation that followed would be remembered as one of the most significant in Council history. Data showing economic benefits from increased cooperation, innovation statistics from collaborative gift-making, health improvements from stronger social connections, crime reduction from communities that cared for their members. But more powerful than any statistic were the personal accounts. Thorne spoke of watching a Ridiculed child teach a human child about probability through a game they invented together. Kylix described the moment she realized that joy could be studied, but not manufactured, only shared. Zala showed recordings of beings from enemy species working side by side, their conflicts forgotten in the simple act of creating happiness for others. The human Nicholas Krauss has not disrupted our economy, Vex concluded. He has revealed that our economy was incomplete. We measured everything except what truly matters, the connections between souls across the vastness of space. The chamber erupted in debate. Traditional powers argued against abandoning proven systems. Younger representatives spoke of the changes already happening on their worlds. Some called for immediate action to stop the spread. Others suggested it was already too late, and that perhaps that was a good thing. In the end, no formal resolution was passed. The Council couldn't officially endorse something that challenged its fundamental structures, but neither could it condemn something that brought such obvious benefits. The Christmas phenomenon was neither sanctioned nor forbidden. It simply was, and that was enough. The news of the Council's non-decision spread quickly. Worlds that had been hesitant to embrace gift-giving now felt free to explore it. The red suit, modified for different anatomies, became a common sight across the galaxy. Gift exchanges were organized between former enemy worlds. Children of 1,000 species grew up with stories of Santa Claus, each culture adding its own elements to the legend. Nicholas Krauss continued his work on Earth, now aided by beings from across the galaxy. The small workshop had become a center of interstellar cultural exchange. But, more importantly, similar workshops appeared on other worlds. The spirit of Santa Claus had evolved beyond one human, beyond one planet, becoming a truly universal phenomenon. Years later, economic historians would puzzle over the period. By traditional metrics, it should have been a time of collapse. Resources were diverted to non-profitable activities. Time was spent on creating joy rather than generating wealth. Yet somehow, civilizations thrived. Innovation accelerated. Conflicts that had seemed intractable simply dissolved as beings found common ground in the act of giving. The answer, when it came, was simple. By focusing on connection rather than competition, the galaxy had unlocked potential that centuries of traditional progress had missed. When beings felt valued, they contributed more. When communities supported their members, everyone flourished. When joy was prioritized alongside profit, both increased. The gift economy didn't replace traditional commerce. It supplemented it with something commerce alone could never provide, meaning transactions became relationships, exchanges became connections, and a galaxy that had seemed vast and cold became a neighborhood where every being knew that somewhere someone cared enough to think of them. All because one human in a red suit had dared to give without expecting return, and in doing so had received the greatest gift of all, a universe transformed by joy. 25 years had passed since Nicholas Krauss first stood before the Galactic Assembly. A quarter-century of change that no prediction algorithm could have foreseen. The galaxy had transformed in ways both subtle and profound, and at the center of it all was an aging human who still wore the red suit. Nicholas sat in his study, surrounded by artifacts from 1,000 worlds. Each one told a story of connection, of barriers broken, of joy discovered in the most unlikely places. His beard, now completely white, caught the light from a Kentari lamp that pulsed in gentle rhythms. His hands, weathered by time and work, trembled slightly as he set down a letter he'd been reading. "Sarah," he called to his former volunteer, now his chief coordinator. "We need to talk about the void sectors." Sarah Chun entered, her own hair showing gray after decades of working alongside Nicholas. She had become Earth's foremost expert on interspecies gift psychology, turning down prestigious positions across the galaxy to remain at the workshop. "The reports are getting worse," she confirmed. 17 systems now. Complete rejection of any gift exchange protocols. They're calling it economic terrorism. Nicholas stood slowly, his movements showing his age. Through the window, he could see the expanded workshop complex. What had started as a simple building now covered several acres, with architecture incorporating elements from every member species of the Galactic Council. But his eyes were drawn beyond, to the stars where new challenges awaited. "It was inevitable," he said quietly. "Not everyone would embrace what we started. Fear of change runs deep, even deeper than joy sometimes." The void sectors represented the backlash that had been building for years. Systems that saw the gift economy not as evolution, but as invasion. Worlds that interpreted every act of generosity as an attack on their sovereignty. Led by the hegemony of rational order, they had created barriers not just to trade, but to any form of cultural exchange. "The council is meeting tomorrow," Sarah informed him. "Emergency session. The hegemony is demanding that Earth be censured, that all gift-giving protocols be regulated or banned." Nicholas touched a hologram on his desk. It showed a map of the galaxy, with warm colors indicating worlds that had embraced the Christmas spirit and cold blues showing the void sectors. The division was growing. "And worse," Sarah continued reluctantly, "there have been incidents. Ships carrying gifts have been turned away. Some volunteers have been detained. The hegemony claims we're undermining legitimate governance." "Perhaps it's time," Nicholas said, his voice heavy with an emotion Sarah had rarely heard from him. "Time for what? To step back. To let others carry this forward. I'm just one human, Sarah. Maybe that's become the problem. They see me as the source, thinking if they can stop me, they can stop all of it." Sarah started to protest, but a chime announced visitors. The display showed a delegation waiting outside. Not officials this time, but a diverse group of beings, some familiar, others new. The first to enter was Telex, the Vorthan poet whose work Nicholas had recognized so many years ago. No longer young, their tentacles now showed the pale coloring of age, but their voice remained strong. "We heard about the emergency session," Telex said without preamble. "We've come to help." Behind them came others. Captain Crocs, the Threxian guard who had learned the joy of creating delicate gifts with powerful hands. The AI Collective's mobile unit, still struggling with emotions, but no longer denying them. Even Ambassador Telia, who had defended Nicholas at that first contentious council meeting. "The hegemony has gone too far," Crocs rumbled. "They're not just rejecting gifts. They're spreading fear, claiming that joy itself is a weapon." Nicholas gestured for them all to sit. The group that assembled in his study represented something remarkable. Former strangers who had become family through shared purpose. They had come without being asked, traveling vast distances because they sensed a crisis approaching. "Tell me what you know," Nicholas said. The AI Collective projected data into the room. "The hegemony has been systematic. They've identified what they call vulnerability points, moments when beings are most susceptible to what they term emotional manipulation. They're teaching their citizens that every gift carries hidden obligations, that kindness is merely disguised control. But that's the opposite of everything we've shown," Telex protested. "Gifts create freedom, not bondage." "To those who have experienced it, yes," Nicholas agreed. "But to those who haven't, who see only through the lens of transaction and power, a gift without expectation seems impossible. Therefore, it must be a lie. Ambassador Telia leaned forward. It's worse than just rejection. They're developing what they call defensive protocols, ways to identify and isolate anyone who shows gift-giving tendencies. They're treating kindness like a disease to be quarantined. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. What had begun as a beautiful transformation was spawning an equally powerful resistance. The galaxy wasn't just dividing, it was polarizing. "We need you at the council session," Croc said bluntly. "Not just as a witness, but as a reminder of how this all started. The hegemony paints you as a manipulator who destroyed galactic order. The council needs to see who you really are." Nicholas looked at each face in turn. These beings had risked much to be here, to stand with him. But he saw something in their eyes that troubled him. They were looking to him for answers he wasn't sure he had. "I'll come," he said finally, "but not to defend myself or our movement. There's something else that needs to happen." The next day, the Galactic Council chamber was more crowded than it had been in decades. The emergency session had drawn representatives from every corner of civilized space. The void sectors sent their strongest advocates, led by Supreme Coordinator Axiom of the hegemony of rational order. Axiom was everything Nicholas was not. Where the human was warm and approachable, Axiom was cold efficiency personified. A hybrid of organic and artificial intelligence. They had eliminated what they called inefficient emotional responses from their being. Distinguished representatives, Axiom began, their voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "We gather to address an existential threat to our civilization. For 25 years, we have allowed sentiment to override sense. We have permitted a primitive emotional response to undermine millennia of progress." They projected images, carefully selected to show the worst interpretations of the gift movement. Factories idle during celebration preparations. Resources diverted to frivolous activities. Beings abandoning profitable ventures to pursue joy. The human Nicholas Krauss, Axiom continued, whether through ignorance or design, has introduced a behavioral virus that threatens the foundation of our society. Order, logic, progress, all sacrificed on the altar of fleeting emotional satisfaction. The chamber stirred uneasily. Even among those who supported the gift economy, the images were disturbing when presented without context. Had they really abandoned so much for so little? "We propose immediate action," Axiom declared. "Regulation of all gift exchanges. Registration of participants. Economic impact assessments before any non-transactional giving. And most importantly, the isolation of Earth until this contagion can be fully studied and contained." The formal procedures required responses from affected parties. One by one, representatives spoke. Some defended the changes, citing improvements in their societies. Others expressed concern about the division growing in the galaxy. The debate was passionate, but felt scripted, as if positions had hardened beyond the possibility of change. Finally, the moderator called for Nicholas Krauss. The human who walked to the center of the chamber moved slowly, but with purpose. He carried no data projections, no evidence to counter Axiom's claims. Just himself, in a red suit that had become a symbol of both hope and controversy. 25 years ago, Nicholas began, his voice carrying despite its softness. "I stood in this spot and gave gifts. Today, I come with a different offering." He turned to address Axiom directly. "You're right about one thing. I did introduce something that changed our galaxy. But you're wrong about what it was. I didn't bring a virus or a weapon or even a new idea. I simply reminded people of something they had forgotten." Sentiment, Axiom dismissed. Emotional manipulation disguised as wisdom. Nicholas smiled sadly. "If that's what you see, then I failed in a way I didn't expect. The gift was never meant to divide. It was meant to unite." He reached into his sack, that impossible bag that had become legend. But what he pulled out wasn't wrapped in festive paper. It was a simple recording device. "This contains messages," Nicholas explained, "from beings across the galaxy who wanted to speak but couldn't be here. May I? The moderator nodded, and Nicholas activated the device. The first voice was a child's, speaking in the clicks and whistles of the Zephyrin language. My name is Zix. Last cycle, our colony was hit by solar storms. We lost almost everything. The hegemony said it was economically unviable to help us. But beings from 7 different worlds sent supplies, asking nothing in return. My family lives because strangers chose to care. Another voice, elderly and frail. I'm keeper of rows of the archive worlds. For 300 cycles, I maintained our historical databases alone. Efficiency protocols said I was obsolete. But after the gift movement reached us, young beings began visiting, bringing small presents and staying to learn. Our history lives because joy bridged the generations. Voice after voice filled the chamber. Stories of connections made, conflicts resolved, innovations discovered through collaboration rather than competition. But also other voices, those who felt lost in the changes, who missed the clarity of pure transaction, who feared what they didn't understand. When the recording ended, Nicholas set the device aside. Every change creates displacement. Every evolution leaves him behind. If I could give a gift that everyone would accept, I would. But that's not how gifts work. They require not just a giver, but a receiver willing to accept. He turned back to Axiom. You see me as your enemy. But I have something for you too. From his sack, he pulled out a small box. Unlike his usual gifts, this one was stark, undecorated, purely functional. I won't force this on you, Nicholas said, holding it out. That would betray everything I believe. But I offer it freely. No strings, no expectations, no hidden agenda. Just an old human hoping to bridge a gap that seems to grow wider every day. Axiom's form radiated suspicion. Every circuit in their being screamed warnings about manipulation, about hidden dangers. But the entire Galactic Council was watching. To refuse would seem like fear. With movements precise and calculated, Axiom took the box and opened it. Inside was a simple equation. Not mathematics or physics, but something else, a logical proof elegant in its simplicity. It showed, in purely rational terms, how the act of giving without expectation could create systemic benefits that exceeded any individual loss. It was the kind of thing Axiom's mind could process, stripped of all emotional content. This is... Axiom paused, processors working furiously. This is actually quite elegant. A gift can be many things, Nicholas said. For some, it's joy. For others, connection. For you, perhaps it's simply data that challenges assumptions. The form doesn't matter. Only the intent to offer something that might have value to another being, without demanding anything in return. The chamber held its breath. This wasn't the confrontation they had expected. No impassioned defense of gift-giving. No condemnation of those who rejected it. Just an old human offering understanding to someone who saw the world differently. But this changes nothing, Axiom said, though their voice carried less certainty than before. Systems require structure. Civilizations need order. Yes, Nicholas agreed. And perhaps that's your gift to the galaxy, maintaining that structure for those who need it. I've never asked anyone to abandon what works for them, only to consider that there might be room for both. Order and joy, transaction and gift, logic and love. He turned to address the full assembly. I came here today not to defend what we built, but to announce a transition. For 25 years, I've had the honor of being Santa Claus for the galaxy. But Santa Claus was never meant to be one person. It's an idea, a role that anyone can fill. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Nicholas continued. Earth will always welcome visitors. The workshops will continue. But it's time for each world, each culture, to find their own expression of gift-giving. Not imposed from outside, but grown from within. The void sectors have every right to their choice. But so do those who choose differently. He looked tired now, every one of his years showing. I'm not stepping back because of opposition or fear. I'm stepping back because the greatest gift I can give now is to trust others to carry this forward in their own ways. The human Santa Claus is just one story. It's time for 1,000 stories from 1,000 worlds. You're abandoning your own movement? Someone called out. I'm setting it free, Nicholas corrected. A gift held too tightly becomes a possession. An idea controlled too closely becomes dogma. If the spirit of giving is to survive and grow, it must belong to everyone, expressed in countless ways I could never imagine. He began walking toward the exit, his steps slow but steady. Then he paused and turned back one last time. To those who embrace gift-giving, remember, it's not about the gift itself, but about the connection it creates. To those who reject it, know that your choice is respected. And to those still deciding, take your time. The universe is vast enough for all approaches. But what will you do? Ambassador Telia asked, voicing what many were thinking. Nicholas smiled. Well, I've always done. Make toys. Write letters. Prepare for Christmas. Just because I'm no longer the galaxy's Santa doesn't mean I stop being Santa for those who still believe. The workshop's door will always be open. As he reached the chamber door, something unexpected happened. Axiom spoke again. The equation. They said, their voice carrying an unusual harmonic. It suggests iterations, that the model becomes more efficient with repetition and variation. Nicholas nodded. Every gift creates ripples. Some fade quickly, others spread across time and space in ways we can't predict. That's the beauty and the risk of giving freely. Axiom processed this. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, including themselves, they reached into their own compartment and pulled out a data crystal. This contains efficiency algorithms my collective has developed, Axiom said stiffly. They could help optimize gift distribution networks. I'm not embracing your philosophy. But if this phenomenon is to continue, it should at least function properly. It wasn't wrapped. There was no ceremony. By any traditional definition, it barely qualified as a gift. But in that moment, in that chamber, it was everything. Nicholas accepted the crystal with the same grave courtesy he would show to the most elaborate present. Thank you, he said simply. Would you like to know what the most efficient gift network looks like? Despite themselves, Axiom leaned forward slightly. What? One where efficiency isn't the only measure, Nicholas said gently. But I think you'll discover that for yourself. He left then, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Behind him, the Galactic Council sat in contemplative silence. The emergency session had been called to address a crisis, to potentially end a movement. Instead, they had witnessed something else, an evolution. In the days that followed, the galaxy didn't suddenly unite. The void sectors maintained their boundaries. Worlds that embraced gift-giving continued to do so. But something subtle had shifted. The Stark Division began to show cracks. Reports came in of small exchanges at border stations. A hegemony patrol ship low on supplies found a cache left by passing traders. No note, no demand for payment. A gift economy world facing technical difficulties received anonymous assistance in solving them. Efficient, effective help with no strings attached. Axiom never publicly acknowledged using Nicholas's equation. But those who worked closely with them noticed changes. Tiny optimizations that seemed to account for factors beyond pure efficiency. Moments where the Supreme Coordinator would pause, as if calculating something that didn't quite fit their usual parameters. Nicholas returned to Earth, to his workshop, to the life he had always lived. But now he was joined by beings from across the galaxy who came not to meet the legendary Santa Claus, but to learn how to become their own versions of him. The Threxian developed a tradition of strength gifts, where the powerful protected the weak without expectation of service. The Kentari created light shows that traveled between worlds, bringing beauty to dark places. The Vorthans established poetry circles where words were given freely to heal hearts and inspire minds. Even in the void sectors, whispers began. Stories of mysterious benefactors who solved problems and vanished. Anonymous donations to struggling colonies. Small kindnesses that couldn't quite be traced or categorized. Sarah found Nicholas one evening in his workshop, carefully painting a toy spacecraft. His hands were steadier when he worked, as if the act of creation gave him strength. "The reports are encouraging," she said. "The movement isn't just surviving, you're stepping back. It's growing in ways we never expected." Nicholas nodded without looking up. That's how it should be. A teacher's greatest success is when students surpass them. "Do you regret anything?" He set down his brush and considered. Through the window, stars sparkled in the clear night sky. Somewhere among them, beings were discovering that joy shared truly did multiply. Others were finding their own paths, their own truths. And yes, some were still resistant, still afraid. But that too was part of the journey. "I regret that I couldn't reach everyone," he said finally. "But I don't regret trying. And who knows? The story isn't over. Gifts have a way of arriving when they're needed most, sometimes years after they're given." Sarah smiled. "Speaking of which, this came for you." She handed him a package, roughly wrapped in what looked like metallic paper. The return address made Nicholas raise an eyebrow. It was from the Void Sectors, specifically from a frontier world known for its strict adherence to hegemony protocols. Inside was a simple object, a tool for toy making, but designed for efficiency in ways human engineering hadn't achieved. No note accompanied it, but one wasn't needed. Someone, somewhere in those cold sectors of space, had understood that even rejection didn't mean connection was impossible. Nicholas held the tool carefully, then placed it on his workbench where he would use it tomorrow. Because tomorrow there would be more toys to make, more gifts to prepare, more connections to foster. The galaxy had learned to play Santa Claus. But in a workshop on Earth, one human continued doing what he had always done, believing that every being deserved joy, that every soul was worth remembering, that the impossible became possible when hearts opened to each other. And in the vast reaches of space, in workshops and homes and gathering places on 1,000 worlds, others were learning the same lesson. The red suit took many forms now. The gifts reflected countless cultures. But the spirit remained constant. Joy shared multiplies infinitely. The revolution Nicholas Krauss had started with a sack of simple gifts had become something no force could stop. Not because it was imposed or mandated or required, but because beings across the galaxy had discovered a fundamental truth. In giving without expectation, they received something beyond price. They received connection. They received purpose. They received the knowledge that in an infinite universe, no one was alone. And that was the greatest gift of all.